Hello everybody, it's Moses here from Incisive Training, and today I want to talk to you about the Department of Health's view on how to deal with restrictive practices within the mental health services. Okay, so in 2014, the Department of Health produced a white paper called Positive and Proactive Care, Reducing the Need for Restrictive Practices. And this paper came about partly because of what happened in 2010/11, where there was a revelation of what was taking place in Winterbourne. There was a learning disabilities unit there where there was found to be systematic abuse of patients, and this was all because of undercover reporting. Now, in this paper that came out in 2014, the Department of Health wanted to establish its view on how we should approach things like physical restraint, seclusion, basically what they call, in an umbrella phrase if you like, restrictive practices. And I'm going to sum it up in 3 simple points. First thing they say is that violence can be separated into 3 parts. You've got the trigger phase, the escalation phase, and then the crisis phase. And in each of these things, we can take certain actions to try and reduce or eliminate the need for a restrictive practice by reducing or eliminating the occurrence of violence and aggression. So number 1, in the trigger phase, what the Department of Health suggests is that we take the time to identify what could be the potential triggers in a given situation for a given client or patient. So is it loud music? Is it noise, a noisy environment on the ward? Is it wording? Is it the lack of time to maybe go out and have a smoke? Or is it another member of staff? So by identifying what the triggers are, we can then move on to eliminating the triggers altogether. So eliminate and reduce the triggers as much as possible in phase 1. Phase 2, where you're getting a situation where you haven't identified a trigger or couldn't eliminate it, and you're having someone becoming more and more agitated, the Department of Health says we should seek to de-escalate the situation. So we use de-escalation skills such as talking people down with a calm voice, using non-confrontational body language, or distracting the person, diverting them, taking them to another room, offering them an alternative. So all of these skills, which by the way, I often say in my training sessions that we kind of innately have a lot of these skills already. We grew up de-escalating situations in our family, in our households. When we go to work late, we're de-escalating our bosses so that we don't get into more trouble. So by using these skills, which very often are what we need to survive in society, we can often de-escalate the need of an intervention by stopping the situation from getting worse and worse. Then for those situations that we can't quite de-escalate, which go to the crisis phase, or they get into a situation where there's violence and severe aggression, then we are going to perhaps need to apply a restrictive practice, whether that be a manual restraint or whether that be using a de-escalation room. What the Department of Health says in that situation is, number 1, it must be a last resort action. Number 2, it must be a planned action. So it's something that we must have thought about before the situation occurred during the trigger phase. And thirdly, it must be something that should be reviewed by debrief and talking to the service user involved, to family members and carers if appropriate, to try and avoid that situation happening again. So in summary, Department of Health has 3 aspects. It's got the primary phase, which is removing the triggers altogether. The secondary phase, which is de-escalating and using staff skills to avert a situation of crisis. And then the tertiary, or the 3rd phase, which is the actual intervention in the event of a crisis, and what we need to do to try and stop those things happening again. You can find this document on the Department of Health website, Positive and Proactive Care, Reducing the Need for restrictive practice, I think you'll find it very useful. If you need our help, you can always feel free to contact us for training over at your site, or indeed sending people to our open classes over here in Hertfordshire. Moses Amasua here from Incisive Training. Thank you for listening.